Present.
Present.
Kathleen Perry.
Present.
And Ashley Randall is not present tonight. On the agenda, we have an administrative appeal of planning board decision, West Bath Parking LLC, State Road, West Bath, map U 07, lot 10. We're going to go ahead and go to Carly for this a little bit. The appeal was made within 30 days.
Correct.
The appeal has been advertised in accordance with the land use ordinance.
It has.
All right, do any members of the board here today have a conflict of interest?
I do
No.
not. No.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and announce the opening of the public hearing for West Bath Parking LLC. You have the right to come forward and address your appeal to the board.
Good afternoon, Board of Appeals members. My name is Georgia Boldick, and I'm an attorney at Pierce Atwood. I'm here on behalf of West Bath Parking LLC. I'm joined by Matt Menahan, who is also an attorney at Pierce Atwood, Dan Diven, who's an engineer at CB and Mahar, and Abby Cassidy and Ted Crooker, who are here also on behalf of West Bath Parking. We are appealing the planning board's decision to deny West Bath's parking site plan application. As stated in our appeal application, we are appealing for the following 3 reasons. First, the planning board added in additional procedures and improperly delayed the approval process. Second, the planning board also allowed 2 members of the planning board who were clearly biased to participate in hearing and voting on the application. And finally, the planning board failed to provide any findings of fact or conclusions of law on their decision. Because of these reasons, we request that the board remand this application back to the planning board and order the planning board to issue an approval. As I just mentioned, first and foremost, the planning board added additional elements to its review process. Under the Development Review Ordinance, which governs site plan review, the planning board has a 2-step process of review. They first hold a pre-application meeting where they meet informally with the applicant to discuss a proposed project. This is a really informal meeting. There's a sketch plan and really no other submission materials required. And it's a time for the planning board to discuss with the applicant what the proposed project looks like and to provide feedback. The planning board met with West Bath Parking in September to do this. After this initial pre-application meeting, the planning board then is required to review a completed application that the applicant submits and to make a final determination. That was not the way that West Bath Planning Board conducted the next part of the procedure. Instead, they added a pre-approval application process. A preliminary approval process. The site plan ordinance does not provide or empower the board the ability to do this, yet they did. As a result, the planning board also violated the site plan review deadline. The deadline is 2-pronged. So firstly, once upon receiving a completed application, the planning board has 60 days to make a final determination on the application. Alternatively, they have 30 days after holding a public hearing to make a final determination. Here, the planning board didn't do that. They received a completed application from West Bath Parking in April, in March ahead of their April meeting, and in May ahead of their June meeting. They also held a public hearing in May and in June on the application, and yet never ruled finally on the application. Because of these reasons, we ask that the Board of Appeals remand this issue to the planning board so that the planning board, and order the planning board to issue an approval of the application. As I mentioned before, the planning board also failed to provide written findings of fact and conclusions of law that explain their decision. The Maine Supreme Court has made abundantly clear on many occasions that planning boards need to adopt written findings of fact and conclusions of law, as Sally said. And if the planning board does not do this, the Supreme Court has held that the application must be remanded back to the planning board so that it can prepare findings of fact and conclusions conclusions of law. The purpose of this, as you know, is so that the public can know the basis for a decision. And here the planning board never provided findings of fact or conclusions of law. They didn't provide a reason for their denial. So again, because of this and the reason I stated before, that the planning board added additional procedures, we ask that the Board of Appeals remand this issue to the planning board and require the planning board to issue findings of fact and conclusions of law. Finally, the planning board's review was improper because they also allowed biased members of the planning board, members Mitchell and Williams, to participate. As Sally mentioned, when a member of the board is biased, they must discuss their bias, and if it affects their vote, they must either recuse themselves or have the board vote to recuse them. Here, members Mitchell and Williams were clearly biased. I'm not going to go over. You can look at our appeals for all of the evidence of that. But as a result, they should not have been able to participate in voting and hearing West Bath parking site plan application. So once again, we request that the Board of Appeals remand this issue to the planning board, and upon remand that they require that Williams and Mitchell be recused from voting. Thank you. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Not yet.
Senator,
That's it.
thank you. Planning board representative, Representative Rebeau.
Yes, Darlene Esserbeck, Chair of the Planning Board. So that sounded like 4 things, not 3.
Well,
I was trying to put them down as fast as I could, so bear with me. So the first one, add the procedure and elements and the 2 steps, the pre-application meeting and the preliminary app, instead of from pre-app straight to final approval. All of the times that the application came before us, it was not complete and would not have gotten final approval. It is unfortunate that there were many of these pre-application, not pre-application, but preliminary application sort of meetings, and then it went on, and I agree with that, but still, as of this day, we still don't have some components that we need to give it final approval. We do not have elevations of the shelter that they are proposing to install. They've added lighting to the site, which is a good idea. We do not have spec sheets on the lighting. We have requirements that it has to be 25 feet or less, the poles, and that the lighting has to be shielded. We don't have that. Those are things that came out in the last meeting. So regardless of the other aspects, we still don't have anything that we would have given final approval.
we'd like to respond. A complete application is,
Wait,
no,
is the planning board,
I'm sorry.
is that the extent of your presentation? Or?
So do I have to answer all 4 of these and then she comes back again?
This is your opportunity to present whatever
And
your
this is all
response
about,
is.
okay, good, I was not told the whole process, so that was for that. So the violating the deadlines, I guess I don't agree with that, because if we have 60 days from the application to give an answer, on April 13th came before us, there was not a hearing. April 11th came before us, there was not a hearing. May 9th, it was denied. That's less than 60 days from the application coming in. Correct? So I guess I don't agree with that. And then 30 days from the hearing, we had a hearing on May 9th. And then on, let's see, June 13th, yes, it's past the 30 days. We usually handle this by the fact that our meetings are every month. It may be 32 days from the second Tuesday because of the ways that they set in the months, but there were determinations within those 30 and 60 days. Except for that last one, which was about 32 days because of how the second Tuesday throws on the month. So I guess I disagree with you there. And that's just kind of the way that we do it as a volunteer board, because since we have it every single month, you're within that 30 and 60 days and how that cycle comes. I don't think the fact that it wasn't a final yes doesn't mean that it wasn't decided upon, that it was a no, which is what ended up happening for the denials. The third, the findings of fact or conclusion, I do absolutely agree with you that we did not give a reason for those denials, despite all efforts to do that. I'm not going to dispute that one at all. And then your fourth, the allowed bias. I guess I have a hard time with this one because the meetings were tough and we had some real issues with just some real concerns about the site, which weren't the applicant's real problem. And then we worked through it and we talked with the DOT to get the flooding issue across the way. And I thought that we worked through these things as best as we could. Yes, it delayed it. That is true, but I guess I just did not realize on some of those and no votes that they were going to be no votes, because it felt like we were working through the issues that were cropping up. You know, there was an issue with the traffic, and then we had Diane Morabito come in and really discuss it with us further. And traffic's kind of a voodoo thing where the numbers don't make sense to normal people, so they were very responsive and came in and helped us with that, and so that seemed to be worked out. And then we had the problem with the water across the street, and then we reached out to the DOT and had that worked out, I thought, to the point where the board would be comfortable with moving forward. And honestly, I've never had a preliminary go denial like this, so it was a little interesting, and I guess I just didn't realize as the chair that I could pull people from the desk because of such things. And the denials at the end were sort of a surprise to me, actually. So that's my answer to that.
Awesome, thank you. We'd like to respond, if that's okay. So to your first point about whether the application was complete or not, an application is complete when it meets submission requirements, not when it meets performance standards. So when we submitted our application in March and May, we made sure that we met all of the standards that applied to our permit application. Secondly, can you remind me what your second point was? I just have a little chicken scratch here.
It was your first one. The violation, the
Thank you, the deadline. Yes, thank you. So, yes, you made the point that you sort of were working within the deadlines. Unfortunately, because you were sort of applying a procedure that is not in the development review ordinance for site plan review, you were not meeting the deadlines. You were doing a preliminary review and approval, and therefore missed what you needed to do, which was a final approval within 30 or 60 days of receiving a completed application. You were operating under a procedure that unfortunately is just not in the site plan review requirements. Thirdly, thank you. And then to your fourth point about bias, yeah, unfortunately when a member is biased, he or she either needs to recuse in a way that affects the way that he or she votes. He or she needs to be recused, or recuse themselves, or have the board vote to recuse them.
Can I respond again? Is that the question?
Good.
When you say an approval, are you talking about like a final yes approval? Or just a decision?
Just a final decision.
A decision. Yeah, we denied it. within 60 days of getting the first application, and 30 days of the hearing. It's not a sticky point, I'm just saying, we denied it.
Could I just make one comment here, which is on this point, which is the process that the board used, and mostly I think probably the board's process was appropriate, when there's a subdivision application before the board, which involves a preliminary approval and then regular approval. And so the planning board used that process, the subdivision process. Unfortunately, the result of that was that by going through a process that's not set forth in the site plan ordinance, it meant that the delay in terms of making a decision, whether approval or disapproval, was based upon a subdivision ordinance that never applied. And so what our argument is that by using an inappropriate process, that meant that the site plan standard in terms of the deadline could never be reached. And so because you could never even reach that 60-day deadline because you never got it off of the starting line. And because you never got to the point that you should have been at, which is approving or considering rather a site plan application. And so because you never got to the starting line, that was an improper process, and therefore it was a violation of the site plan ordinance standards. And so our application was prejudiced because of that, because we never had the opportunity to go to that next step, which is the first step in the final process for the site plan. So that's our...
You had a issue with the fact that they used the subdivision
Right.
time.
Because exactly, that's our, because a different ordinance, it's a different provision in the ordinance, which is subdivision approval. And I get that that's sort of the usual standard that the planning board applies.
What ordinance do you feel they should?
The development site plan approval provisions, which under the site plan approval provisions, there is no provision for preliminary approval. And as Georgia said, our application was complete at the time, and I get that it wasn't complete for purposes of issuing approval or otherwise, because you guys had questions, the planning board had questions. But let me just finish here. But it was complete for purposes of starting that deadline for the final approval, and that completeness meant that clock started ticking. And we've now missed that by a long time because of that error. And so I mean, I get that. You know, you had a lot going on and a lot of different things going different ways, but that was kind of in our view, the fundamental problem that got us where we are here today. Well, obviously in addition to failure to make written findings and conclusions of law and the bias issue.
So you're saying that the site plan was used, and not subdivision was not used, subdivision not?
Well, so the proper ordinance would have been to apply the site plan review ordinance process, which has a informal meeting initially, as Georgia said, and then the final approval process, which has a 60-day deadline once you have a complete application. The process that was used was, you know, an initial meeting, informal meeting, but then a preliminary process, which is importing from the subdivision ordinance a process that doesn't exist. And that adds a whole new level, a whole new layer of timing under this that we shouldn't have been subject to.
So you're basing this, the 30-60-day problem on the wrong process?
Is because the wrong process was used. Right. It was because the subdivision process was used, not the site plan process.
I guess I would say two things to that. One, we're trying to fix our ordinances so that they are written better, because you've read that site one, and I can tell you it's terrible. It's not very clear, okay? The other thing I would say is we would have, it was never complete with all the components, so it was never going to get approved until it was complete. Regardless of whether we do sketch, then final but not final, final but not final, final but not final, or whether we do sketch, preliminary, final, it still is not done as of the last meeting. And I realize the delays have been really not a great thing, but it's still not complete to this day, so that we could approve it as a final thing, whether we use one process or the other. It's not.
Darlene, was
Yeah.
the subdivision timeline used?
So what we did 4 years ago is we tried to revise the ordinance to make the timeline very similar to the subdivision. Because if you look at the site, it's really kind of not clear what you're supposed to be doing. There's like a pre-application that talks about approval, and there's no pre in between. And you know that it's never final and right the first time, so that you get a final approval. So whatever we call it, there's an interim in there somewhere. An interim meeting where there's because sketch, there's no decision at all. And then the second time they come in, I don't think it's almost ever 100%. So there's just an individual step in there. So we just call it that. And it just happens to align with the same thing as what subdivision does. You know, and it's unfortunate that all of this has happened this way.
Do you consider this a subdivision?
No, but I think that what we have in the book now for process, procedure, and rules in the subdivision, which we updated years ago, is clear and solid and a good thing to go by. So we were gonna use that, apply it to site, and change it because of the site is different sort of thing. And we wrote it up, and it never got in. It's still in the wings to do.
But just to be clear,
But-
I mean, just to be clear, I mean, the process here, I mean, I get what you're saying, and that's exactly our point, which is it never got in the ordinance. What you're saying, in the ordinance that applies here is the site plan ordinance, and there's a two-step process. Sketch plan, no decisions made,
Yes.
which you did,
Mhm.
and then final plan approval, which we never got to because the planning board didn't go through that process. And so because the planning board applied a process that never got adopted, even if it may have been the intent to be adopted, it wasn't adopted, we didn't get there. And we did have a complete application for purposes of submission, for purposes of starting the clock ticking, the 60 days.
Right.
That's the distinction. I mean, I get your point,
Right.
but what we should have had is a process where in that time period, we did just what you guys did, but it was geared towards a final plan approval. And because the subdivision process was incorporated, we never got there. And that's an improper way to proceed. And so we think that was prejudicial to us because we weren't able to get to that initial kickoff point.
So you're saying your application was complete?
It was complete for processing. We're not suggesting that the planning board couldn't ask for more information.
It was not finalized.
It wasn't, right, there was information that the planning board wanted in order to determine whether or not that they should approve it.
So,
We did process it. It went through the process.
so,
It just was never complete, so it didn't get a final.
so your complete is a different complete.
I think that's right, I think that's true. I think, I mean, you might want to ask your attorney about this, but I think there's a decision between complete for purposes of clicking, of starting the clock running and starting the process running for final plan review. And then and then the other issue is whether or not they should actually issue the final plan review 60 days from then. And that's not really before us, right, before you right now, because we never got to that point.
Chair, is there, if I ask a question? Okay, this is a question for the planning board chair. Do you have the development review ordinance in front of you?
Yes.
Page 111. It says that,
Yes.
okay, bottom of page 111.
Yep.
The application and fee shall be submitted to the planning board for review, and that says within 30 days of filing an application, planning board shall notify an applicant in writing either that the application is a complete application, or if the application is incomplete, the specific additional material needed to make a complete application. So I guess my question is, I didn't see it, but is there a letter from the planning board to the applicant saying that the application is incomplete and there identifies additional materials that are needed?
No. Okay.
So you,
That's.
this testimony about how, there's no lighting plan, there aren't elevations, were those items needed to make the application complete under subsection 12.1C? And you just didn't notify the applicant of them?
No, let me see.
So that's just getting at the point made
Correct.
by the applicant, that
Right.
your definition of complete is not with reference to section 12.1C. You're saying that for approval, the planning board needed additional items, but as far as a complete application, these elevations and the lighting plan
Right.
were not needed to make a complete application for purposes of 12.1C.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. And so we did.
You understand that there's a
Yes.
notice thing that's required. If the planning board's gonna take the position that an application is incomplete, you gotta tell the applicant.
So that comes down to who does what in the town as far as that goes, which is a town staff question.
Okay, but for purposes of 12.1C, there's no letter that just hasn't been provided to the Board of Appeals here that says, dear applicant, you are missing the following items to make your application complete.
Correct, we do not do that.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as an application has most of everything in it, we have them come in, we look at it, we sit down, we discuss it, and then we say, okay, this looks great, this needs some work, and you are missing this, and this. And then they come back the next time, and if they have all of it, then they're done and it's a final approval. And that's what happened in each case, every time, in April, May, and June.
So
And
was
everything's
the
the
applicant
same.
ever informed that these elevations and the lighting plan were required in order for the board to vote in favor of the application?
Yes,
And where is that in the, like, can you show us what meeting minutes those?
so the lighting was proposed in the June meeting, so that would only be in the June minutes. Before that, I think we asked about it in April and May and June. It may not be in all of the minutes. The minutes don't record every single thing. But yeah, the lighting was new in June. So it would only be in the June.
So you have the June 13th, 2023 minutes?
I think they're in this packet.
Really quick, while you read that, does our ordinance state that we received a letter stating that the application is incomplete and the reasons why?
Yeah, that's,
It
that's 12.1C.
Can you furnish any letter that you received from the planning board in
No.
town that tells you why your application was incomplete? Alright,
We would not have sent a letter that's incomplete. What happens is, we look at it, it usually these from engineering firms, they have tons of information. So we don't usually go back and say you need to bring more. Something of this magnitude or this, like a site plan or subdivision. If someone was coming in with, say, a home occupation or something like that, code enforcement would look at it, we would look at it, and we would ask code enforcement to talk to them and say, you need to also provide this and this and this when you come to the meeting, because maybe they don't have their deed, which is title right and interest, so we can't even talk to them, that sort of thing.
I know I was past chair of the planning board.
I know you
For
were,
many
but
years, and
I
I
understand.
mean, honestly,
You never wrote letters
that
either.
person would come to us in person
Mhm.
and we would tell them this is what you're missing.
Right,
I mean, regardless of what we did past practice, I think if we didn't follow what the written rule is, and we were in the wrong,
correct, that's been in
those
the
times
ordinance.
we've done that, so.
And I've been trying to get it fixed for 5 years. And we're being held up
We
by
spent a lot of time trying to get
administrators.
this
Yeah.
for a lot of years, so.
No,
Okay, so I'm looking at the June 13th, 2023 minutes, page 3, and I do see in the fifth paragraph that you, Darlene, requested the applicant present a spec sheet for the lighting for the final application.
right,
Okay, so that's you, but that's not necessarily imputed to the board as a whole, correct?
it depends, I guess, on how you.
Okay, this is just, I'm trying to figure out if this has all been communicated to the applicant, because I think you
Oh,
can
yes.
see where this is going.
Yeah,
And I don't think the Board of Appeals wants to, have this come back
So-
at a later date when
mhm.
you, with the planning board saying, oh, the applicant was supposed to submit X and they didn't, can you show me, okay, so we get about the spec sheet, that's at the June 13th meeting. And you also said, there were some other requirements were created related to the lighting? What-
Elevation,
You said
oh,
something about,
no, the lighting is, we needed information on the pole height and the lights,
What
to make
page
sure
is
they
it
were
on?
shielded.
can you show us where that is?
Page 3. So it was discussed, Carly doesn't write every single word down, and she quotes who says it in the meeting. She wouldn't say, if I had said it and said this is also required, she wouldn't say the board said that was required. Right?
But you think that at the June 13th meeting, you identified not only this issue about the spec sheet, but about the pole height and the shielding of the lights?
That was what the spec sheets would show you, is the pole height and then the
Okay.
lights were shielded. Because what they presented was just dots on the plan where the poles were gonna go, which is good. But to make sure it meets the requirement in the ordinance of 25 feet or under, and that it's shielded, you have to have those spec sheets.
And so this issue about the elevations of the waiting, the shelter for,
Yeah, I'm looking for
where,
that.
where is that?
I'm looking. I can tell you where it is in the ordinance that's required.
I want to know where the planning board notified the applicant of that requirement.
You see it on the video. It's not in the minutes.
Could I just make one thing clear? And Ms. Daggett, I get where you're going on that, but I do just want to be clear that we don't have a problem providing additional information, and we would provide it, but our position is that the preliminary plan should not have been denied on the basis of not yet having some information that was discussed at a meeting, because there is no preliminary plan to be denied, right? There's no process to not deny.
I
preliminary
understand your point, what I'm trying to get at is to have the planning board chair identify what further information is being requested of this applicant. So if this does get remanded back to the planning board, there isn't any question about, the applicant forgot to provide X, Y, and Z, and so you're gonna need to be tabled or denied. So I'm just trying to get clear, so everyone in this room understands what it is that the planning board thinks is still missing for a vote on an approval on this application. It's not, notwithstanding the standard about submittal of the application that has to be complete. I think the planning board chair has testified that that letter hasn't been sent and wasn't sent. But to the extent the planning board thinks that this application is still missing some items that are needed before any final approval can be granted, I want to have the planning board articulate what those specific items are and where they were previously mentioned to the applicant, so we're all on the same page about what might be missing.
But could I just finish my point, which is, and I appreciate that, but my point is that we're actually asking that the Board of Appeals remand this to the planning board and require the planning board to issue the permit as opposed, and we understand that Ms. Daggett's advice may be remanded to the planning board so the planning board can go through all and decide all the approval criteria, including based on new information. But the reason we're actually saying, first off, that you should remand it to the planning board to require the planning board to issue the permit is because the deadline, the process used by the planning board was a faulty process and resulted in prejudice to the applicant because we never got to the point where the deadline started to click in, which they should have because we had a complete application. And so because of that, we've been prejudiced. So I guess I understand, Sally, where you're coming from, but I just want to reiterate our primary argument, which is that the planning board shouldn't even actually have to address those issues. if you accept our primary argument, which is that the board should be required to issue the permit. But I understand that your position may be that the board should review all the criteria, and in that case, I totally get where you're coming from and appreciate that.
Can I ask a question? So you're asking for them to tell us that we have to approve it as is right now? Is
Yes,
that what you're saying?
yes, because the process that you applied was a faulty process and resulted in excessive delay. Because of the preliminary plan approval, that was not an appropriate provision for the site plan.
So then we don't have,
And I think you should just answer my question,
Sorry.
because that's really, the board will decide whether it is going to,
Sally's gonna
accept-
disagree, she's gonna disagree with me.
accept the appellant's argument, and in case the board does not, I think it would be helpful, Darlene, if you identified what else is outstanding as far as
I mean,
the lighting spec sheet, and you said elevations for the shelters, but you haven't shown me where that was identified to the applicant in either the April or May or June.
I can't guarantee to you that it made it into the minutes, even though it was definitely discussed. I'm still looking. I can show you in the ordinance where it's required, and that we did discuss it, but I can't. I may not be able to find in here, because usually at the very end, we go over at the very end, the list of the things that they still need, and that's not in here.
Is that at the end of the plan, the
At
public
the end of
hearing,
the-
or at
right.
the end of the agenda item?
At the end of the agenda item, we tell them what they still need, and then we do a vote. And so it's definitely not there.
Okay, I'm on tab B, which are the April 11, 2023 minutes, page 4 of 6.
Did you find it?
About halfway down the page, Ms. Estabrook restated that the board would like additional information regarding on-site waste storage. Has that now been supplied?
Yes.
Lighting generators. Has that information now been supplied?
That's changed. Right now, what BOW does is they have those little generators with the pole lights that go up, like you saw in construction. And what they propose now is permanently fixed light poles, and which is much better. So we were asking if they were going to be adding more of those generator light stanchions, which they are not.
Okay, so that
So
issue
that's-
has been resolved. Okay,
that-
what
yep.
about grading? Is there any additional grading information that's still missing?
Nope, that's
And
fixed.
stormwater management?
That was fixed when the DOT, there was the DOT meeting here talking about the culvert across the road and the water height. And the DOT is supposed to be putting that on their docket to replace that culvert and lower it and do the re-ditching. But they did not tell anyone here when that was gonna be. And I was absent for that because it was like at noon time on a Tuesday when I was in New York. So I think Christine and Carly were there, they could probably speak to it, but I was not.
Okay, now I'm on the May 9th meeting minutes, which is tab G, page 4. There was a motion by you, seconded by Mr. Wallace, to grant preliminary approval with the caveat that the lighting plan, culvert, and DEP permitting be resolved. So,
Right, at the time, we didn't have a lighting plan, which they had then provided in June. The culvert was the problem underneath the state road culvert, which is DOT jurisdiction, there's nothing that the applicant could do. That was before we reached out
okay,
to the DOT to work on that issue. And then the DEP permitting, the DEP permit just wasn't finished yet, I think. It wasn't approved.
so,
And I
so,
think-
so far I haven't seen anything about these elevations of the bus shelter.
I think it was in the May, and there's nothing listed in the end of the May.
least, it's your understanding, I understand you don't, you're not the entirety of the planning board, but you think that the outstanding issues are the lighting spec sheet and the elevations for the bus shelter.
Yes.
And is the planning board's position that it will not grant final approval while there are other agency approvals such as DEP or Army Corps of Engineers until those other approvals are obtained by the applicant?
Historically, it depends on which board member you ask. Historically, the votes have gone towards the applicant when not all of the DEP permits have been in. I personally disagree with that. I think though, the DEP permit that's outstanding for these guys was just a name change, and that's probably finished by now. It was not, and I'm fine with that, it was not something like finishing the whole site location permit or anything like that. So it was a minor thing, just a name change on the property through the DEP.
For the stormwater permit, is that?
Yeah, no, it's not a stormwater permit, it's through the waste, help me again. Solid waste permit,
Just for the record.
because it's a landfill, and I think the name just needed to be changed.
Just for the record, Sally, the appellant here, the applicant, would object to requiring the issuance of all of the permits before issuance of the town planning board permit. But I suppose we can deal with that before it's planning.
Yeah, that's not a Board of Appeals issue. I'm just trying to figure out what the planning board considers to be outstanding.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Good. Anything else? Close. The planning board's rebuttal. I'm gonna open floor to public comment. Seeing none, I'm closed.
I did receive a letter from another planning board member, Jim Williams, if you want to pass that down. I don't know if Jim would like to speak today.
I would just object to the admission of this letter, actually. We don't think it's appropriate for a planning board member to be submitting written rebuttal evidence. The planning board was represented by the chair here, and for individual members of the board to be submitting their individual positions, we don't believe is relevance. This is an appellate review that is based upon the evidence that was before the planning board, and for planning board members now to present additional evidence or argument is not appropriate before this Board of Appeals, and we would object to it and ask that it not be accepted.
Regardless if that person is a citizen of the town, they still have the right to speak? Just
Yeah,
because
well,
they hold a
because it-
voluntary position on the
if-
planning board?
If that person had not participated before the planning board, had recused himself, then he absolutely would have full rights to speak just like any other citizen. But because that person participated as a member of the planning board, that person does not have the ability to speak with respect to this application and the process except at the planning board, that is in the planning board record, not before this Board of Appeals.
Is there-
I still think
is
the
there
board
more-
needs to at least look at it. The board can't make a decision without even at least looking at it, but I
Is
think
there any rule of law on that?
we need to look, I don't know what it says,
Well, we flipped it over. The way I see it is, I mean, regardless of his standing in the position he holds on a voluntary board in town, are we sitting back and saying that a resident of the town does not have the right to speak on behalf of something that goes on?
Not at all, not at all.
So then I think we do look at it.
Well, so let me just object though, the resident of town does not have the ability to submit additional written evidence, even if you assume for a moment that a planning board member can speak even though he participated before the planning board, which I do not believe is the case. I think it's different than a regular member of this public. There's factual information here about 830 vehicles in an hour's time. There's all sorts of information that's factual. We don't know if this is in the record. It's inappropriate for you to be considering factual.
Since you've read it.
No, I just have it here in front of me.
So here's my question though. Any of the information that he put in there, would he have learned through sitting in the middle, in the audience at a public hearing? Would he know the 830 vehicles?
I'd
If
have-
he merely came to every planning board meeting and sat back and listened to what was being told to the planning board, would he know all the information that is in here, regardless of the fact that he sat on the board.
But it's not just that. He says this will create traffic snarls at nearby intersection and restrict traffic flow for local residents. So he's making testimonial statements about the facts. That's information that is inappropriate in an appellate review. He's making factual statements here that are based upon facts that you're not supposed to consider because this is an appellate review. So I guess my point is,
I'm not gonna consider the facts in there. I'm just asking, as a resident of town, is he allowed to give opinion? And if his opinion is that he feels 5 cars or 1,000 cars could cause a traffic problem, I feel he should have the right to tell us how he feels. And that's just my opinion on that.
okay.
You know, and that's the way I'm looking at it. If the rest of the board wants to disagree, and we ask the town attorney the opinion, I feel that if, we're not going to sit him down from speaking at the meeting if he wishes to speak, and I think he should be allowed to give his opinion. I mean, that's just my feeling, and if I'm wrong here, please let me know. I don't think he's coming forward as a, somebody that knows everything about all of this. But if there's information in there that is outside of what he could have learned, other than sitting in the audience at a meeting, I mean, if a regular citizen who wasn't appointed to the board sat out there, listened to all this information, and wrote this identical letter without holding a seat, would you have an issue with us hearing what they had to say?
I would object if they're providing you with factual information that wasn't in the record before the planning board. But you're right, some of this may be before the planning board, but I have to go through this word by word to know that. But it looks like that preliminarily that some of it is not in the planning board record, just statements, factual statements about what the number of cars would produce, for example.
And I can just advise the board, I've looked at the letter, and to me, remember, this is an appellate review, so whatever evidence was in front of the planning board is the record, and that's all the materials, exhibits A through P, that were posted on the town's website. I think that's the record that you're reviewing. And to me, this submittal from Mr. Williams looks like he's trying to advocate for why, this project shouldn't go forward to the merits. He's not addressing the administrative appeal, he's addressing the underlying planning board application. So I think that the board should exclude the consideration of this letter, because it doesn't relate to the administrative appeal, it relates to the underlying planning board application, and the planning board has a representative here who's purporting to represent the planning board, and I don't think this is where individual planning board members can come in and talk about the underlying planning board application. So that's my suggestion to the board, that you move to exclude consideration of this letter from Mr. Williams.
If Mr. Williams wishes to, does he still have the right to speak?
He can argue about why the administrative appeal should be granted or denied, but he's not going to argue about the underlying merits of the application.
Okay. You guys agree?
Should there be a formal motion to exclude?
I think yeah,
I'll make the motion to exclude the
August,
August
it is.
2023 letter
I second.
from Mr. Williams.
Second. Or do you want to ask if there is a?
Yeah.
Any discussion?
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Is there any other public comment? I'm gonna close the public comment. This time I'm gonna close the public hearing.
Can I actually say something really quick?
Public comments closed.
Yeah, it is.
Just
Never
not,
mind.
sorry.
Okay.
I think as a planning board, we need to sit back and look at a number of items here. And I'd like to say,
Anything to comment on?
I think we just, as a town, we need to address a few issues going forward. taking into account all our various boards of volunteers. And it's a tough business on the planning board especially. But we do need to get, in the towns working with us, revising the ordinances, straighten them out, and to have a guideline and more procedures in line going forward.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, which, you know, we've tried to do
Yeah.
for many years. I think, you know, as a volunteer board, and I sat on the planning board, I think we did a really good job at changing a lot of things over the years. I think a lot of times it's a thankless position to sit over there.
Truly is.
A couple of things that I have is that, you know, we weigh back and forth between, you know, is the application complete, is the application not complete? In my opinion, and it was brought up today that they did not receive a letter stating that the application was not complete. I will admit, from my time as a chair of the planning board, I never signed a letter to anybody stating that whether it was complete or not complete, and shame on me for that. But that is truly what it says. We go to town meeting, everything in there is voted in by the residents of the town, not by just the members that sit here or a select person. You know, I read your entire thing, we can sit back and we can discuss bias and stuff like that, and I think a lot of that's opinion. I mean, that's just me, you know, whether somebody's biased on something or not. But the very first thing, when somebody brings an application to me or the board, when I was on the planning board, is we look at what they wanted to do, and the next thing we look at is, does code allow it or does code not allow it? And, you know, you follow the code. In a situation like this, and we don't hear very many of these, when we get the application from, you know, you coming to us, I guess that, you know, asking the Board of Appeals to look into this and make a decision and go from there. The first thing we do is, you know, we obviously look at who it is, and the next thing we do is the application is denied and reason for denial. I have filled these out before, and oftentimes, I would say almost every time, that's denied, we give a reason, not that it's a tie vote, 2 votes for, 2 votes against. We've heard a lot of reasons why there's a denial right now, and honestly, I don't know what those things are. And regardless of the decision that this board makes, I think that we should know what the reason for denial was. So I'm going to make a motion to approve the applicant to go back to the planning board for decision. Is that okay?
So, you want to grant the administrative appeal and remand the, application back to the planning board, so that the planning board issues written findings? But I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I just wrote, motion to approve the applicant, remand the applicant back to the planning board for decision.
Okay, for a decision on the merits, including findings of fact.
Yeah, that's fine, I mean, yeah.
So that would be a grant of the administrative appeal.
Yes.
I'll second that for personal discussion.
Yeah. So we have a motion. We have a second discussion.
So what would be the result of this?
Well,
This motion?
it goes back to the planning board, you know, and from what I'm hearing through this whole thing is that the reason for denial at this point was that you didn't have all the appropriate stuff.
No, that's not true.
We don't know the reason.
We don't know the reason.
Right, but I mean, I'm hearing all these different things, and, you know, if it gets denied again, I don't know what the next steps are, if it gets approved again, but we, you know, as an appeal, and they come to us with an appeal, and they say, we were denied, what's your reason for denial? 2 votes yes, 2 votes no. Not, we didn't meet this section of code, we didn't meet all these other things. That's the problem that I have. And
I agree with you, and I,
regardless of anything else anybody says, that's the problem that I have.
should I answer?
No, they're in deliberations and public comment is closed.
Sorry.
That's
Never
the
mind.
issue I have.
I guess question from the board is, you've heard the appellant argue that the remand should be to the planning board with instructions to grant the approval based on the fact that the process wasn't complied with. And I'm not sure that the board has bought that argument or not, so we need to, I guess, maybe clarify where you are on that issue.
Yeah, I don't know if you're gonna meet the code or not. You know, I don't know where that all stands. I don't know all of that. That's why we have a planning board in order to make that decision. You know, yes, we may be able to come up with something if we had a reason for denial, which we don't have.
So just to be clear, the motion is to grant the administrative appeal, remand to the planning board for a decision on the merits to include findings of fact. And it's not a remand to grant the application, or the approval, excuse me.
No, we are not.
Yeah,
doing
just wanna make that clear.
So going forward, what is the practical result of us granting a motion? What will the process entail then?
Well, I mean,
I think the planning board has to go back to the drawing board and, well, I mean, the Board of Appeals can at least, suggest that the applicant submit these two items that the planning board chair is saying have not yet been submitted. Suggest the applicant provide those items, but that, again, that's sort of advisory on the applicant. And then let the planning board, act on the application to issue formal findings of fact, conclusions of law, so that the applicant knows, why the planning board, grants or denies the application, and then it can come back to you folks. But as of right now, we don't know why, the vote was 2-2.
I mean, that's why I agree with you, because the last one of these we heard was a non-conforming lot, and it was cut and dry.
Yeah.
And it was very simple for us to sit back and look and make a decision on that. This isn't simple, I mean, we had an application from just a citizen who, when we found out why it was denied, we knew exactly why it was denied.
Well, I just want to be clear on
Yeah.
what the action.
And if they were to deny again, would it come back before us a second time? And I don't have an issue with that. And I'm sorry the time frame might not work for the people putting in this application, but I don't know, we've heard so much that timelines weren't met, we didn't follow the appropriate timelines per the code, stuff was missing, we need these approvals, so it's simply a name change, all these things, and that's great, we can hear all that. But the application is denied, and the reason for denial is a tie vote. When we recently just did one of these, reason for denial is you get a non-conforming lot that did not meet the code, and that was why we denied it. Alright, any other discussion?
No, my question was with Sally defining those two items, that's what I was.
I think that you can include in your written decision advice to the applicant, that you also provide those items.
Notes on, yeah. Yeah, and I'll say again, it's very hard to sit in these positions, These are a full-time job, I'm a full-time fireman, so what do we do in these situations?
And I agree, the biggest problem is we don't know
Oh, I'm
what the
thankful-
denial was.
I'm thankful Sally was here, and I'm thankful Darlene was here, and, I'm thankful you guys came, Jim, I wish we could write a letter and we spoke, that's the way it is. Any other discussion from the board? All those in favor? Passes unanimous.
Okay, you need to do a written decision. I suggest that, maybe, day or so to draft something up, you guys meet
7
again.
days, right?
Yeah, we have 7 days.
We actually, what we do now is that the chair can sign.
The board has to vote.
Right.
You can't just authorize the chair to sign something that the rest of the board hasn't even
We
seen.
had questions on that before.
So,
Yeah, we did.
so the question is, do do you wanna, next Monday is Labor Day, so do you wanna meet next Tuesday, or do you wanna try and meet either Thursday or Friday?
So I have not seen my parents up here, and on the 30th, I am going to Pennsylvania for a week.
Okay, what time are you leaving,
I'm leaving on the 30th, and I'm not going back there until I'm leaving on the 30th, and I'm not coming back until the 5th, which puts us beyond the 7th.
well, because Monday's the holiday, I mean, could you meet that Tuesday? The sixth?
Back on the field?
Coming back on the 5th with a 10-hour drive from that morning.
Well, this meeting should be relatively quick.
Yeah, maybe it'll be a little bit later on.
Yeah, I mean, could you meet, whatever, yeah, I mean, sure, I don't need to be at the meeting necessarily,
Right,
it's a
just
public
an email.
meeting, but I would get the draft to Carly in advance, so that,
Andrew Lawson, and
yeah, well, Carly will get it.
But because that will be a public meeting, we would have to post it, right?
Yeah, well, that's not, I mean, it's a continuation basically of today's, but
I just worry if I say 5 o'clock and all of a sudden I get to GW Parkway and it's bumper to bumper for 3 hours, that would be my fear.
I was thinking that the fifth was Monday, sorry, the fifth is the Tuesday, yeah.
If this Tuesday.
And you're leaving like first thing in the morning on the 30th? Yeah. I guess I could get it to you for, yeah, you don't wanna meet before you travel, right?
Well, I'm at the fire station tomorrow. I'm leaving
We could
right
hold a meeting at the fire station.
Yeah, I could get you something by 5 o'clock tomorrow. Maybe relatively short. Does that work? Could you all meet tomorrow night?
we time 5 o'clock tomorrow night.
That won't work from here, it's 24-hour shifts, required to be there. Fire station, that's gonna be an issue.
Well, I guess, your rules allow you, oh, you wouldn't have a quorum because if you're not there.
Do we allow video conferencing on those?
Yeah, that makes it even more complicated. When does your shift start tomorrow?
7 a.m. to 7 a.m.
Okay, and then you're at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, you're getting in the car, I mean, could,
7:50 and I'm on the road.
in
But I
the,
apologize for this, just so you guys know.
No. I
It's been my
totally-
career
I-
for 26 years, so I mean.
I'm sorry to put you through
I guess
this.
that means for Dave and Kathleen,
Is it possible that you could,
meet at 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning at the fire
Well,
station?
I mean,
7:30.
is it, if we were to meet tomorrow evening, let's say
So,
5 o'clock, I mean,
you have an appointment?
I could, oh,
if
yeah.
you're later than that, I was 5 o'clock. Sure, why not?
Well, what do you, I mean?
No, let's do it.
I'm already messing everybody else's schedule up for me.
I mean, would later,
No.
if we had it at the fires, if we're at, it's at the fire
Well, I don't
station.
know, I don't want to hold a municipal meeting in the city of Bath.
Oh, I thought you were in West Bath, okay, sorry,
No.
yeah, no, we're not meeting in Bath, sorry.
But I can sneak out of the firehouse and comments to be available to respond, that would be an
Yeah.
issue.
So Dave, then the question is, tomorrow night, what time are you available?
5 o'clock.
Are you sure, I mean,
Yeah, 5
okay.
o'clock.
All right,
Thanks, Dave.
you'll reconvene tomorrow at 5 p.m. And Carly, are you available to?
I am.
Okay, so,
Did you say 5?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It's complicated.
You put that fire out there.
That's the problem.
So we have to just,
so I will, get something to Carly by 5 o'clock tomorrow. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock, it's a public meeting, you're all invited to attend, but the board is gonna basically, have the draft and make any edits, and then hopefully vote to approve it as
As
it is.
written.
Can
Should be
you,
relatively quick.
can you send us a copy of it when you send it to the?
Yep. It's gonna be pretty close to 5 o'clock.
Yeah, sure. No. Thank you for that, Sally.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Sorry. Education has it.
All right, we don't have any minutes to go up, do we? All right. Need a motion to adjourn?
A second?
All those in favor?
Thank you very much.
You guys want to jot down your email address, so I can shoot you those.
Thank you.